Strange Stories from a Chinese Studio. Liaozhai Ji is a collection of short stories written by Pu Songling during the Qing Dynasty, mostly centered around supernatural themes, including fox spirits, ghosts, and strange beings. Liaozhai Quan is a set of colored illustrations depicting the scenes from these stories, spread across about 90 volumes scattered around the world. These volumes are bound with foldable covers and wooden boards at the top and bottom, measuring 25 centimeters in length and 20 centimeters in width. The covers are decorated with song brocade, and around the edges of the brocade there are wooden strips about 0.9 centimeters wide, engraved with 2 grooves. Today, we continue with the story from volume 63. As usual, it is not that we skipped over 2 volumes. Rather, after volume 60, volume 63 is the latest one discovered. It may have been privately collected or perhaps lost in the passage of history. Volume 63 contains 12 stories, which are Wang Ke Shou, Wang Shi, Yuan, Feng Mu Jiang, Jishan, Shu Sheng, Jian Chang Zhai, Qin Sheng, Jia, and Cao's tomb. We will tell each of these stories one by one. We would like to thank our channel's Little Fish for once again dedicating a large amount of time and effort to organizing, translating, and sharing these with us. Our channel, Eastern Brush, Western Soul, is composed of several friends passionate about Eastern ink painting and ancient texts. These open and free shares are intended to ensure that everyone can freely access and experience these ancient Eastern civilizations. The first story in volume 63 is Wang Ke Shou. Wang Ke Shou was from Huangmei County in Hubei province. He had the extraordinary ability to remember events from his past 3 lifetimes. In his first life, he was a scholar studying in a temple. The temple's monks owned a mare that gave birth to a small mule. The scholar took a liking to the mule and forcefully took it from the monks. After his death, when the king of hell reviewed his life's record, he was angered by the scholar's greed and cruelty. As punishment, the scholar was reincarnated as the very mule he had taken from the temple to repay the monks. The mule was born, and the monks treated it with great care. However, the mule, in its new form, longed for death, but found no way to escape. As it grew, it often considered jumping into a ravine to end its life, but was afraid of betraying the monks' kindness. It feared that the punishment in the afterlife would be even worse, so it resigned itself to live. Years passed, and the mule eventually died. It was reincarnated into a farmer's family, and from birth it could speak. The parents, thinking it was a demon, killed it. It was reborn again, this time into the family of Wang the scholar. Wang was nearly 50 years old when he unexpectedly had a son, and was overjoyed. Wang Ke Shou, as a child, was exceptionally intelligent. However, remembering that in his previous life he had been killed for speaking too early, he chose to remain silent. Until he was 3 or 4 years old, people believed he was mute. One day, while his father was writing an article, a guest arrived, so he put down his pen and went to greet the visitor. Wang Ke Shou, seeing his father's unfinished article, felt an urge to complete it. When his father returned, he asked, "Who has been here?" The family answered, "No one." His father was greatly puzzled. The next day, he intentionally left the title of a paper on the desk and went out. Soon he returned, sneaking back in. He saw his son hunched over the desk, writing several lines on the paper. When Wang Ke Shou noticed his father, he was startled and cried out, kneeling and begging for mercy. His father was pleased and took his hand, saying, "You are the only son in our family. Since you can write, this brings honor to our entire household. Why hide this talent?" From that point on, his father taught him more diligently. Wang Ke Shou later passed the imperial examination and became a successful scholar. He eventually rose to the rank of governor of Datong. The second story in volume 63 is Wang Shi. In Yuan, there was an ordinary man named Wang Shi who traveled to Boxing to carry salt. One night, he was caught by 2 men. Thinking they were patrolmen from the local salt merchants, he dropped his salt bags and tried to escape. However, his feet wouldn't move, and he was soon bound up. He begged for mercy, but the 2 men revealed their true identity. They were ghost officers from the underworld. Wang Shi became terrified and asked if he could return home to say goodbye to his wife. The two ghost officers refused, explaining, "This time, you might not die immediately. It's just a temporary labor duty." Wang Shi asked, "What is the task?" The ghost officers explained, "The newly appointed King of Hell saw that the Nai River had become clogged, and the toilets in the 18 layers of hell were filled with waste. Therefore, he has ordered us to capture 3 types of people to clean the river: thieves, those who privately mint coins, and those who illegally sell salt. There is also a special group who are tasked with cleaning the toilets, people from the brothels." Wang Shi followed the ghost officers into a city and arrived at the government office. There, he saw the King of Hell sitting on a throne, reviewing the Book of Life and Death. The ghost officers reported, "We have captured Wang Shi, a salt smuggler, and brought him here." The King of Hell, seeing Wang Shi, was furious. He said, "Salt smugglers, like corrupt officials and dishonest merchants in the world, are harmful to the people. The poor, who barely have any capital, are only trying to make a living, so how can they be considered criminals?" He punished the two ghost officers by making them buy 4 due of salt and have it delivered to Wang Shi's home along with the salt he had been carrying. Wang Shi was left behind and given a wolf-tooth club, ordering him to supervise the laborers cleaning the river. The ghost officers led him to the Nai River, where they saw the laborers chained together in long lines like ants. The water was murky, red in color, and unbearably foul-smelling. The workers were naked, carrying baskets and shovels, dredging the river. Rotten bones and decayed bodies filled the baskets, and workers carried them away. While in the deepest parts of the river, workers had to dive to retrieve the debris. For those who slacked off, the ghost officers used their wolf-tooth clubs to strike their backs and butts. One of the ghost officers handed Wang Shi a small fragrant pill the size of a bean, instructing him to keep it in his mouth to endure the stench. As Wang Shi supervised, he saw a salt merchant from Yuan in the river, dredging the water. Wang Shi was particularly harsh with him, striking his back in the river and his buttocks when he came ashore. The salt merchant was terrified. After being soaked in the foul water for several days, Wang Shi finally stopped. After 3 days and nights, half of the laborers had died and the river was finally cleaned. The same 2 ghost officers escorted Wang Shi back to his home, where he suddenly came back to life. 3 days earlier, Wang Shi had gone out to carry salt but never returned. In the morning, his wife opened the door and found 2 bags of salt in the yard, but Wang Shi was still missing. She sent people to search for him and found him dead on the road. When they brought him back home, he was barely alive, and his family had no idea what had happened. After he woke up, Wang Shi told his wife everything. The salt merchant, who had been in the river with him, also died the day before, but had only just come back to life. The areas where Wang Shi had been struck with the wolf-tooth club had become large, festering sores, and his body was decaying, emitting a horrific stench. Wang Shi went to visit the salt merchant, who, upon seeing him, shrank his head into the blanket, frightened, just as he had been when in the Nai River. The merchant took a year to recover and gave up his business of selling salt. The salt regulation and the so-called private salt merchants, as defined by the government, refer to those who do not participate in the public system. The term private salt merchants, used by the authorities and salt merchants themselves, refers to those who do not engage in their shady dealings. Recently, in Shandong, a new regulation has allowed local merchants to set up salt shops, each limited to a specific area. Not only are the common people from other counties prohibited from purchasing salt here, but even people from within the same county are restricted from buying salt at shops in other counties. However, these salt shops secretly set up traps to lure people from other counties, selling them salt at a much lower price, while selling the same salt to locals at several times the price. They also send patrols along the roads to ensure that the people in their jurisdiction cannot escape their network. If someone from outside their jurisdiction comes to buy salt, they are severely punished as private salt merchants. Alas, it's an injustice. Those who evade paying tens of thousands of taels in tax are not called private merchants, but someone who carries 8 shi, a traditional unit of weight of salt, is branded a private merchant. If someone sells salt to another county, they are not considered a private merchant. But if a local person buys salt from another county, they are labeled a private merchant. This is truly unjust. Among all the laws, the salt law is the strictest, yet it allows poor soldiers and civilians to sell a little salt to get food without being forbidden. Now, however, everything else is allowed, but they specifically target these poor soldiers and civilians. These impoverished soldiers with their wives and children starving for food follow the law and refuse to become thieves, and they maintain their dignity, not turning to prostitution. Yet, when they are forced to, they use 10 taels of their savings to earn just a little bit of profit. If every county had such common people, even if they left their doors unlocked at night, it would be acceptable. Are these not good citizens of the world? As for those salt merchants, not only should they clean the Nai River, but they should be tasked with cleaning the toilets in the 18 layers of hell. And the officials, year-round, during festivals, accept bribes from salt merchants, using the law to help them slaughter the good citizens. So, for the sake of the livelihood of good citizens, it's better to become a bandit or counterfeit copper coins. Bandits rob people during the day, and officials act as if they are deaf. Counterfeiters forge money with blazing furnaces, and officials pretend to be blind. Even if they are sent to clean the river in the future, they wouldn't be like a salt seller, who earns very little but is immediately punished by officials. Alas! Now, the officials have no benevolent laws. They only listen to the salt merchants' rules. Every day the law changes, and every day there are new tricks. How can those who break the law not appear every day? How can good citizens not die every day? The salt merchants, following the old practice, would annually send large sums of money, equivalent to several shy of salt, to the county officials as part of a salt supply. During the holidays, they would also send lavish gifts. Thus, whenever salt merchants visited county officials, the officials would greet them politely, speaking to them as equals, and sometimes even offering tea. When a salt merchant delivered a salt smuggler, the officials would hastily punish them without question. Once, when Jiang Xinian was serving as the county official in Sichuan, a salt merchant came and followed the old custom, bowing without kneeling. Jiang Xinian, furious, said, "The previous county officials accepted bribes from you and had to treat you with courtesy, but I buy my own salt. What are merchants to dare to act on equal terms in the court?" He ordered someone to pull the merchant's pants down and punish him. The merchant begged for mercy, and only then was he released. Later, when two salt smugglers were caught, one managed to escape and the other was brought to the county office. Jiang Xinian interrogated him, asking, "Where did the other smuggler go?" The smuggler replied, "He escaped." Jiang Xinian retorted, "Do you have a problem with your legs that you can't run?" The smuggler responded, "I can run." Jiang Xinian ordered, Since you've been caught, you can't run. If you can really run, stand up and show me." The smuggler stood up and ran a few steps before stopping. Jiang Xinian shouted, "Run forward! Don't stop!" The smuggler then took off running and escaped the court, to the laughter of all who witnessed it. Jiang Xinian's affection for the people did not end with this incident. It became a well-known story in Sichuan, and the locals still talk about it with great enjoyment today. The third story of Volume 63, Ban. Yin Yuanli, a native of Yunnan, was skilled in using acupuncture to treat illnesses. During a period of war, he fled to the deep mountains. As night was falling and the village was still far off, he feared encountering tigers or wolves. From a distance, he saw two men ahead on the road and hurried to catch up with them. When he got closer, the two men asked where he was from, and Yin Yuanli introduced himself by his surname and origin. The two men clasped their hands in a respectful manner and said, "Ah, it's Dr. Yin, the renowned healer. We've long heard of your great name." Yin Yuanli then asked them for their surnames, and they introduced themselves as Ban, with one named Ban Zhua and the other Ban Ya. They explained, "We are also seeking refuge. Fortunately, there's a stone house nearby where we can stay, and we humbly ask you to visit us. We also have another matter to discuss with you." Delighted, Yin Yuanli followed them. Soon they arrived at a place near a rocky valley where a stone house stood, and the two men lit some firewood to serve as a makeshift candle, and it was only then that Yin Yuanli noticed their appearance, ferocious faces and powerful bodies looking nothing like good-natured individuals. He thought that there was no other place to go, so he would have to leave his fate to chance. As they entered, Yin Yuanli heard groans coming from the bed. Upon closer inspection, he saw an elderly woman lying flat on her back, seemingly in great pain. Yin Yuanli asked, "What illness does she have?" Banya replied, "It is for this reason that we have requested you, sir, to come." He took a torch, shining it on the bed, and invited Yin Yuanli to approach and examine the woman. Yin Yuanli saw that the woman had 2 large lumps under her nose and around her mouth, the size of bowls. She said the pain was severe and that it interfered with her ability to eat. Yin Yuanli assessed the situation and said, "It's an easy fix." He took out a moxa bundle and applied moxibustion to the woman for several rounds. "She will be fine after a night," he assured. The 2 men were overjoyed and roasted deer meat for their guest. There was no wine or other food, only the deer meat. Banjua apologized, saying, "It's a bit rushed, and we didn't know you'd be visiting. I hope you won't mind the lack of proper hospitality." After eating, Yin Yuanli lay down on a stone block to sleep. Despite the 2 men's sincerity, their roughness and brutish demeanor made him nervous, and he couldn't sleep soundly. Before dawn, he woke up and asked the old woman about her condition. The woman, now awake, touched her face and found that the lumps had burst, leaving 2 open sores. Yin Yuanli urged the 2 men to get up, and they used a fire to heat the area and apply some medicinal powder to the sores. "It's healed," Yin Yuanli announced. After bidding them farewell, the 2 men presented him with a cooked deer leg as a gift. 3 years later, Yin Yuanli was traveling through the mountains again when he encountered 2 wolves blocking his path. Just as the sun was about to set, a large pack of wolves appeared, surrounding him. He was thrown to the ground by one wolf, and several others rushed to attack, tearing his clothes to shreds. Yin Yuanli thought that he was doomed. Suddenly, 2 tigers appeared and charged at the wolves. The sight of the tigers sent the wolves scattering in fear. The tigers roared in anger, and the wolves, terrified, cowered on the ground, motionless. The tigers swiftly killed all the wolves before walking away. Yin Yuanli, miraculously surviving, continued on his journey, but he was worried about finding shelter for the night. Just then, an old woman appeared and saw his condition, exclaiming, "Dr. Yin, you've suffered." Yin Yuanli sadly recounted the events and asked how she knew him. The woman replied, "I'm the old woman you treated in the stone house, the one with the lumps." Yin Yuanli suddenly realized who she was and asked if he could stay with her for the night. The woman led him to her house, where lights were already lit inside. "I have been waiting for you for a long time," she said, and offered him a change of clothes, allowing him to replace his torn garments. She also set out food and drink, warmly welcoming him. She poured herself wine from a ceramic cup and drank with him. She was not only talkative, but also a good drinker, behaving unlike most women. Yin Yuanli asked, "What happened to the 2 men who were with you? How come I don't see them?" The woman answered, "Those were my 2 sons who went to meet you. They must have gotten lost on the way." Yin Yuanli was touched by their kindness and drank heartily, eventually falling into a deep sleep in his chair. When he awoke, it was already morning. Looking around, he realized that there were no houses nearby, and he was sitting alone on a rock. He then heard a sound below, a heavy, labored breathing, like the sound of an ox. When he approached, he saw that it was a tiger, still asleep, with 2 large scars on its mouth, each the size of a fist. Yin Yuanli was terrified and feared the tiger would wake up. He quietly made his escape. It was at that moment that he realized the 2 tigers who had saved his life were, in fact, the same 2 men, Banjua and Banya, whom he had met 3 years ago in the stone house. The 4th story of Volume 63, Mu Yuan. This story is part of the same series as the Frog God's story from Volume 28, though it is divided into 2 parts in the Liaozhai Jie. The Frog God often speaks through a shaman, The shaman can perceive the god's mood and pass it on to the people. If the shaman says the god is pleased, then good fortune follows. However, if the shaman says the god is angry, the family sits in sorrow and anxiety, sometimes even losing their appetite. Is this merely a tradition, or is the frog god truly divine, not a mere figment of imagination? There was a wealthy merchant named Zhou, who was notorious for his stinginess. At the time, the locals were collecting funds to build a Qin Sheng temple. Whether rich or poor, everyone contributed money and effort, except for Zhou, who stubbornly refused to donate a single coin. Time passed, and the funds were still insufficient, leaving the project incomplete. The organizers were at their wits' end. One day, during a ritual to honor the frog god, the god suddenly possessed the shaman and spoke. General Zhou Kong, under the guidance of Qin Sheng, has appointed me to oversee the fundraising. Bring me the account book. The people hastily handed over the book. The shaman declared, "Those who have already donated need not be pressed further. Those who haven't, write down the amount they are willing to contribute." Everyone complied, recording their donations. Then the shaman asked, "Is Zhou here?" Zhou, trying to blend into the crowd to avoid detection, was suddenly terrified when the question was asked. Reluctantly, he stepped forward. The shaman pointed to the account book and ordered, "You will donate 100 taels." Zhou refused. The shaman grew angry and said, "You've paid 200 taels for your illicit debts, and now you're asked to contribute to a good cause." It turned out that Zhou had once had an affair with a woman, and her husband caught them, forcing Zhou to pay 200 taels as compensation. Now the frog god was revealing this embarrassing secret. Zhou, both ashamed and fearful, reluctantly agreed to donate the 100 taels. Back home, Zhou told his wife about what had happened. His wife said, "The shaman is extorting you." After that, the shaman repeatedly came to ask for more money, but Zhou refused to give any. One day, while resting at home, Zhou suddenly heard a strange sound outside, resembling the labored breathing of an ox. When he looked up, he saw a gigantic frog outside his door. The frog was large enough that it barely fit through the door, and it clumsily squeezed its way inside, turning and placing its chin on the doorstep. Zhou and his family were terrified. Zhou thought to himself, "This must be the god asking for the donation." He quickly lit incense and prayed, offering 30 taels up front, with the rest to be paid later. The frog didn't move. Zhou then increased the offering to 50 taels, and the frog shrank by about a foot. Zhou added another 20 taels, and the frog shrank again, now as small as a lump. Zhou, in fear, promised to pay the full amount. Only then did the frog shrink to the size of a fist and slowly crawl out of the door, disappearing into the wall crack. Zhou hurriedly took the 50 taels to the site where the temple was being built. The people were shocked to see the notorious miser finally part with money, but Zhou said nothing about the reason. A few days later, the shaman once again demanded, "Zhou still owes 50 taels. Why hasn't he paid?" Fearing the consequences, Zhou reluctantly sent 10 more taels, hoping to settle the matter. One day, while the Zhou family was having dinner, the giant frog returned. Just like before, it crawled into the house, its eyes wide open, seemingly furious. After a while, the frog climbed onto the bed, shaking it as if it might topple. It then placed its mouth on the pillow and fell asleep, its belly swollen like a cow, taking up the entire bed. Zhou was terrified and quickly took out 40 taels to make up the full 100. However, despite his offering, the frog remained immobile on the bed. Before long, small frogs began to appear, and the next day they were everywhere, on the grain storage, on the bed, and even on the stove where they ate flies. The dead flies fell into the cooking pot, contaminating the rice and making it inedible. By the third day, the entire courtyard was filled with frogs. There was no room to move. The Zhou family was in complete panic and sought help from the shaman. The shaman declared, "It's definitely because the donation was too small." Zhou, fearing further repercussions, burned incense again and prayed, offering an additional 20 taels. Only then did the giant frog lift its head. As Zhou continued to increase the amount, the frog slowly raised 1 foot, and when the total reached 100 taels, the frog finally moved its legs, climbed off the bed, and began to crawl out of the door. But after only a few steps, it turned back and lay down inside again. Zhou, now truly frightened, asked the shaman what this meant. The shaman guessed that the frog wanted the full payment immediately. Zhou had no choice but to hand over the money, and only then did the frog leave. However, a few steps away, the frog's body suddenly shrank and merged with the other frogs, disappearing into the crowd. Once the Guansheng temple was completed, the opening ceremony also required additional funds. The shaman pointed to one of the leaders and said, "You should contribute this many taels." Among the 15 leaders, all except 2 were named to donate. The leaders pointed to the 2 men who had not been singled out and said, "We've already donated with them." The shaman responded, "I'm not asking you to donate because you are wealthier than them. It's based on how much you've embezzled. These funds were collected from everyone, and you must not line your own pockets. I fear disaster will befall you if you continue this way. Since you were the ones leading the temple construction, I'm allowing you to pay back what you've stolen to avert misfortune. As for the 2 who are honest and didn't participate, they are exempted." Then the shaman went home, rummaging through his cabinets. His wife asked what he was doing, but he didn't answer. Eventually, he brought out all the silver in the house and announced, "This shaman has secretly embezzled 8 taels of silver. Now he will pay it all back." Everyone counted the silver, and it amounted to only 6 taels. The shaman noted the shortfall. Seeing this, the people were stunned and no longer dared to argue. They all paid their contributions in full. After the shaman woke up, he had no recollection of the events. Someone told him what had happened, and he was deeply ashamed. He quickly gathered his remaining silver to make up the full amount. However, 2 people still hadn't paid, and one of them fell ill for over a month, while the other developed a large sore. The medical expenses far exceeded what they owed. People said this was the consequence of their greed. The 5th story of Volume 63, Feng the Carpenter. Governor Zhou Yode intended to convert an old royal mansion into a military office. Once the craftsmen were gathered, a carpenter named Feng Minghuan stayed there overnight. One night, as Feng was settling into bed, he noticed that the window was half open, and the moonlight outside illuminated everything as brightly as daytime. From a distance, he saw a short wall with a red rooster standing on it, staring intently. Soon, the red rooster flew down from the wall and landed on the ground. A little while later, a beautiful young girl about 16 years old peered into the room through the window. Feng thought it might be the mistress of one of his fellow workers, so he pretended to be asleep, straining his ears to listen. By this time, the other people in the house had fallen asleep, and Feng's heart began to race with private desires. He secretly hoped the girl would mistake the place and come to his bed. Before long, the girl indeed leaped through the window and into Feng's arms. Feng was overjoyed and remained silent as the 2 of them enjoyed each other's company. After their union, the girl left on her own. From then on, the girl appeared every night. At first, Feng kept it a secret, but eventually he asked the girl if she had mistaken him for someone else. She replied, "No, it's not a mistake. I admire your character, so I've come to offer myself to you." Not long after, the project was completed, and Feng was preparing to leave. The girl was already waiting for him in the fields. Feng's home was not far from the city, so the girl followed him back. Upon entering his house, Feng noticed that no one else could see the girl. It was then that he realized she was not human. They lived together for a few months, but Feng became increasingly weary and exhausted, his spirit drained. He grew more and more frightened and sought the help of a priest to expel the evil spirit, but it was to no avail. One night, the girl appeared in fine clothes and said to Feng, "All relationships have their destiny. What is meant to come will not be pushed away, and what is meant to leave cannot be held onto. From now on, I will say farewell to you forever." After speaking, she vanished. The 6th story of Volume 63, Xian, the Spirit of the Medium. Mi Buyan from Jiangsu was skilled in spirit writing and fortune-telling. often gathering with people to summon spirits and engage in dialogue through the mediums. One day, a friend noticed a faint cloud in the sky and decided to write a couplet, asking the spirit to respond with a matching line. The first line read, "Sheep fat, white jade, sky." The spirit wrote the reply, "Ask old Dong in the south of the city." Everyone doubted whether the spirit could come up with a matching line, and they began to talk among themselves. Later, when they traveled to the southern part of the city, they came across a piece of land with soil as red as cinnabar, which piqued their curiosity. They happened upon an old man tending pigs and asked him about the unusual soil. The old man replied, "This is pig's blood-red clay." At that moment, the person remembered the spirit's earlier response and was struck with amazement. He then asked the old man his surname, and the old man replied, "I am Old Dong." It wasn't so surprising that the spirit had matched the couplet, but the truly astonishing part was that the spirit had known in advance that the old man in the south of the city was called Dong. This was truly miraculous. The seventh story of volume 63, Shu Sheng, the Mud Scholar. In Luokun, Sichuan, there was a man named Chen Dai, who had been dull and unattractive since childhood. He married a woman, a certain Mrs. Mo, who was exceptionally beautiful. However, due to her husband's shortcomings, she lived in sorrow and dissatisfaction. Despite her inner frustrations, she maintained her chastity and lived in harmony with her mother-in-law. One night, while she was alone in her room, a gust of wind suddenly blew open the door. A scholar entered, removed his hat and robes, and laid down beside her on the bed. The woman was terrified and tried to resist with all her might, but her body went limp, leaving her helpless as the scholar took advantage of her. This continued every night. After more than a month, the woman's health began to deteriorate. Her face grew pale and she was exhausted. Her mother-in-law, noticing the change, became suspicious and asked her about it. At first, the woman was too ashamed to speak, but after persistent questioning, she finally revealed the truth. Her mother-in-law, frightened, immediately realized this was the work of a demon and tried to stop it, but despite her efforts, nothing could end the ordeal. So, her mother-in-law decided to hide Chen Dai in the room, armed with a wooden stick, to catch the scholar. As expected, the scholar came again that night. He placed his hat on the table, undressed, and draped his robes over the clothes rack. Just as he was about to climb into bed, he suddenly stopped and exclaimed, "Ah, there's the presence of a living person." He quickly began to dress again. At that moment, Chen Dai sprang from his hiding place and struck the scholar in the side with the stick. There was a thud, and when he looked around, the scholar had vanished. Lighting a bundle of twigs, they saw that a mud-covered outfit had fallen to the ground, while the scholar's mud-covered hat remained on the table. The eighth story of volume 63, Jian Chang Zhai, The Debt Repaid. Mr. Li Zhuoming was a generous and charitable man. A local resident who had been a lazy and idle person since childhood lived with Mr. Li and worked for him as a laborer. This man, unable to do farm work and from a poor family, was occasionally able to do small tasks for Mr. Li and was well compensated each time. Sometimes, when he couldn't afford breakfast, he would beg Mr. Li, and Mr. Li would give him a portion of grain. One day, the man came to Mr. Li and said, "I have received so much help from you, enough for my family of 4 to avoid starvation. But surely this cannot continue forever. I ask for a loan of 1 bushel of green beans to use as capital for trade." Mr. Li, happy to help, gave him the requested amount of beans without hesitation. However, a year passed and the man had not repaid the loan. When Mr. Li inquired, he found that the beans had already been used up. Out of sympathy for the man's poverty, Mr. Li did not press him for repayment. Later, Mr. Li went to a Buddhist temple to study, and after 3 years he had a dream in which the man appeared and said, "I owe you for the green beans, and I have come today to repay the debt." Mr. Li reassured him, saying, "If I were to insist on repayment for every loan, then nothing would ever be settled. You do not need to worry about the green beans." The man, looking troubled, replied, "Indeed, but when a person works for someone, even if they are paid 1,000 gold, they do not need to repay it. However, if someone helps another without reason, even a small amount, such as 1 or 1.5 measures of grain, cannot be taken without paying back, much less a larger sum. After speaking, the man left. Mr. Li grew suspicious. Soon after, his family informed him that a female donkey had given birth to a particularly large foal. Mr. Li suddenly realized, could this foal be the person I spoke with? A few days later, when Mr. Li returned home, he saw the foal and, as a joke, called out the man's name. To his astonishment, the foal responded, running towards him as if it understood its name. From that moment on, the foal was referred to by the man's name. One day, Mr. Li was riding the foal to Qingzhou when the chief steward of the Wang family saw it and took a liking to the animal. He offered a high price, though the price had not been finalized. However, Mr. Li was suddenly called back home due to an urgent matter. A year later, while the foal was eating alongside a stallion, the stallion bit the foal's leg, breaking it beyond repair. A cow doctor who came to Mr. Li's house examined the foal and said, "Please let me take care of this foal. I will treat it daily, and if I can heal it, we can split the selling price." Mr. Li agreed, and after several months, the cow doctor sold the foal for 1,800 coins, giving half of the amount to Mr. Li. When Mr. Li received the money, he suddenly realized that the exact amount corresponded to the green bean loan the man had taken. This was a clear sign that debts incurred in one life could be repaid in another, offering a powerful reminder of the importance of doing good deeds. The ninth story of Volume 63, Qi Driving Out the Monster. Su Yuangong, a scholar from Changshan County, had devoted himself to the pursuit of immortality after the fall of the Qing Dynasty. He gave up the ambition for official success and focused entirely on learning Taoist practices and spells for driving away monsters. As time passed, he became well known for his abilities, and people from nearby areas often spoke of his name. One day, a wealthy man from a nearby county sent a letter of sincere invitation, asking Su Yuangong to visit. He also sent money and a horse to escort him. Su Yuangong asked the servant, "Why has your master invited me?" The servant, uncertain, replied, "I was only told to bring you here, but I do not know the reason." Su Yuangong decided to follow the servant. Upon arriving at the rich man's house, Su Yuangong was warmly received with a banquet set up in his honor. However, the host never mentioned the reason for the invitation. Unable to contain his curiosity, Su Yuangong finally asked, "What exactly is it that you want from me? Please tell me and ease my mind." The host insisted there was nothing important and tried to divert the conversation, urging him to drink more wine. As the evening wore on, Su Yuangong began to feel uneasy, sensing something was off. The host eventually invited him to a garden to continue drinking. The garden was beautifully designed, but was surrounded by dense bamboo and trees, creating a dark and eerie atmosphere. As they sat in a pavilion, Su Yuangong noticed the ceiling was covered in thick cobwebs, and the place felt unnervingly silent. After several rounds of drinking, the host asked to replace the wine with tea. The servants hurriedly cleared the table, stacking the dishes and placing them in a room to the left. After a few sips of tea, the host excused himself without explanation. The servant then quickly escorted Su Yuangong to the room where he would sleep, setting a candle on the table before rushing out in a hurry. At first, Su Yuangong thought the servant had gone to fetch bedding, but after waiting for a long time with no sound of movement, he decided to close the door and try to sleep. The moonlight streamed through the window, casting shadows on the bed, and the chirping of birds and insects filled the air. He could not shake his uneasy feeling. After a while, Su Yuangong heard a noise on the ceiling that sounded like footsteps. The sound grew louder, moving closer to the door of his room. Terrified, he covered his head with the blanket, his hair standing on end. Suddenly, the door burst open. Su Yuangong cautiously peeked from under the covers and saw a monstrous creature. The creature had the head of a beast and the body of a human, covered in dark, coarse hair like a horse's mane. Its sharp, white teeth gleamed, and its eyes glowed like lanterns. The creature approached the table, lowering its head to lick the leftover food from the dishes. In no time, several plates were clean. The creature then approached Shu Yuangong's bed, sniffing at his covers. In a panic, Shu Yuangong jumped out of bed, covering the creature's head with the blanket and shouting loudly. Surprised and frightened, the creature struggled and managed to escape through the door. Shu Yuangong quickly got dressed and ran outside, only to find that the garden gate had been locked from the outside. Desperate, he climbed over a low wall, landing in the horse stable. The stableman was startled when he saw Shu Yuangong, who explained the events and asked to stay the night in the stable. As dawn broke, the host sent someone to check on Shu Yuangong. When the man was found missing, the host was alarmed. After searching, they found Shu Yuangong in the stable. Furious, Shu Yuangong stormed out and said, "I was unfamiliar with the spell to drive away monsters. You invited me here and did not tell me the truth. I had an enchanted hook in my pocket, but you never even provided it for me. You were trying to put me in danger." The host apologized profusely, explaining that he had planned to reveal the truth but was afraid it might trouble Shu Yuangong. "We didn't know you had the enchanted hook," he said. "Please forgive me." Though Shu Yuangong was still displeased, he rode off on a horse, heading home. From that moment, the monstrous creature never returned. The host, whenever he hosted banquets in the garden, would often smile and say to his guests, "I will never forget the help that Mr. Shu provided." The 10th story of Volume 63, Qin Sheng. Qin Sheng, a man from Laizhou in Shandong, was known for making his own medicinal wine. One day, he mistakenly added a poisonous herb to the brew, but, unable to throw it away, decided to seal the bottle and store it. Over a year passed, and one evening, Qin Sheng was craving a drink but had nothing available. Suddenly, he remembered the sealed bottle of medicinal wine he had stored away. Curious, he opened it, and the rich, fragrant aroma poured out, tempting him beyond measure. Unable to resist, he poured a glass and prepared to drink. His wife, sensing something was wrong, pleaded with him not to drink it. Qin Sheng laughed and said, "It's better to die from drinking this than to die from longing for it." He took a drink, and as he reached for more, his wife accidentally knocked over the bottle, spilling the remaining wine onto the floor. Qin Sheng, driven by desire, crouched down and drank the spilled wine directly from the floor as if it were water. Soon after, his stomach began to hurt violently. Unable to speak, he clutched his chest and died that very night. His wife, overwhelmed with grief, prepared a coffin and laid him to rest. The next evening, however, something extraordinary happened. A beautiful woman, no taller than 3 feet, suddenly appeared in the room. She walked to his body and began pouring the contents of a cup into his mouth. Qin Sheng suddenly revived, gasping for breath. He knelt and asked her who she was. The woman smiled and said, "I am the fox spirit. Earlier, your husband died from drinking the stolen wine. I revived him, but as I was passing your house, I felt pity for you. Because you suffered the same fate as he, I decided to use the remaining potion to bring you back to life as well." With that, the woman vanished, leaving no trace behind. In another tale, a friend of mine, Chu Xingsu, a scholar who loved to drink, found himself in a similar dilemma one night. He craved alcohol but had no way of obtaining any. He turned over the idea of using vinegar as a substitute for wine. His wife laughed at the absurdity of it, but after much insistence from him, she agreed and prepared a pot of vinegar for him to drink. Chu Xingsu finished the entire pot, satisfied for the moment, and fell asleep. The next day, Chu Xingsu sent a servant with enough money to buy a bottle of wine. On the way, his younger brother, Shang Chen, encountered the servant and asked what had happened. The servant explained, "Madam said we didn't have much vinegar left, and since half of it was already consumed last night, she feared we'd run out if we bought more, so she let him drink that." The people who overheard the story burst out laughing. They couldn't understand why someone would drink vinegar to satisfy an alcohol craving. After all, if one could enjoy the sweetness of poison, how could vinegar be so difficult to swallow? This odd event was passed down as a story among the locals. The 11th story of Volume 63, Jujia, The Deceptive Plot. Once, a servant of an imperial censor was standing on the street when a well-dressed man approached him. The man struck up a conversation, gradually asking about the censor's name, rank, and family background. The servant, in turn, shared this information. The man introduced himself as Wang, a servant from the princess's household. As their conversation deepened, Wang said, "The political path is treacherous, and those in high positions often rely on influential connections. Does your master have such connections?" The servant replied, "No, he does not." Wang then offered advice, saying, "This is a grave mistake. You can't ignore the little advantages and forget the big dangers. I suggest you try to get close to the princess. She treats people with respect and could offer protection. For example, a certain assistant minister was introduced to the princess through me. If you can offer 1,000 taels of silver as a token of goodwill, you can easily meet her." The servant was excited about this opportunity and asked Wang where he lived. Wang pointed to a nearby house and said, "We live in the same alley. Didn't you know?" The servant rushed home to inform the censor, who was pleased by the prospect. The censor prepared a lavish feast and sent the servant to invite Wang. Wang arrived happily, and during the banquet, he went into detail about the princess's character and private life. He added, "If not for the relationship of living in the same alley, I wouldn't help you, even for 100 taels of silver. But since we're neighbors, I'm happy to assist." The censor, impressed by Wang's generosity, became even more grateful. Before leaving, Wang said, "Prepare the gifts, and I will speak to the princess. I'll arrange the meeting as soon as possible." Several days passed before Wang returned, riding a magnificent horse. He hurriedly told the censor, "Get ready quickly. The princess is always busy, with people constantly visiting her. But right now, she has some free time. We must go at once, or it may be days before we get another chance." The censor, eager to make the best impression, gathered his gifts and followed Wang. They walked for miles, winding through narrow paths until they finally reached the gates of the princess's palace. After a long wait, Wang returned and announced, "The princess has summoned the censor." A procession of servants passed the message, and the censor, bowing low, entered the palace. Inside, a beautiful woman sat on a high dais, dressed in luxurious robes that shone brightly. The attendants, also dressed in fine silks, stood respectfully by her side. The censor knelt and offered his respects. The princess, with grace, invited him to sit beneath the eaves and presented him with tea in a golden bowl. They exchanged a few polite words, and the censor respectfully took his leave. As he exited, the palace staff presented him with a pair of satin boots and a fur hat as a token of the princess's favor. Grateful for Wang's help, the censor went to his house to thank him in person. However, when he arrived at Wang's residence, the door was tightly shut and no one answered. The censor was puzzled and suspected that Wang had gone with the princess. Over the next 3 days, he visited Wang's house 3 times, but the door remained locked. He even sent someone to inquire at the princess's palace, only to find the same situation. The gates were locked, and the staff said no one by that name had ever been there. Further inquiries in the neighborhood revealed that the house had recently been rented by a few people who had already left. The censor, disheartened, returned home, realizing he had been thoroughly deceived. In a similar story, a deputy general who had recently traveled to the capital with a large sum of money hoping to gain promotion found himself at a loss for how to proceed. One day, a man in a fur cloak riding a fine horse came to visit him. The man introduced himself as someone whose brother-in-law was a close confidant of the emperor. After some tea, the man asked to speak privately with the deputy general and said, "There is currently a position for a general, but if you're willing to spend some money, I can speak to my brother-in-law and make sure the emperor hears of your abilities. Once you have the position, no one will be able to take it from you." The deputy general was skeptical, but the man reassured him, saying, "There's no need to hesitate. I only want a small share from my brother-in-law. You won't lose anything. Once we set the terms in writing, you pay the agreed amount when the emperor calls you. If it doesn't work out, you can keep your money. No one will take it from you." The deputy general, convinced by the man's calm assurance, agreed to the deal. The next day, the man arrived to take the deputy general to meet his brother-in-law. He introduced him as Mr. Tian, a wealthy man with a fortune akin to that of a royal family. The deputy general knelt to pay his respects, but Mr. Tian was dismissive and aloof. The intermediary then presented a written agreement to the deputy general saying, "We've just discussed this matter with Mr. Tian. It's impossible to proceed without at least 10,000 taels of silver. Please sign here at the end of this document." The deputy general, eager for the position, signed the agreement without hesitation. Mr. Tian then said, "One can never be too careful. I fear he may change his mind later." The intermediary laughed and reassured him, "You needn't worry. If you're able to get him an official post, surely you can also remove him from his position if necessary. And besides, there are many in court who would jump at the chance to join us, yet we're too humble to accept them. Your future is bright, General, and I'm sure you won't be foolish enough to lose your moral compass." The deputy general, reassured, swore an oath, and the intermediary promised him, "In 3 days you'll have confirmation." 2 days later, as the sun set, several people rushed in, calling out, "The emperor is waiting to see you." The deputy general was thrilled and hurried to the palace. He arrived to find the emperor seated on the golden throne, surrounded by guards. The deputy general immediately knelt, offering 3 loud shouts of, "Long live the emperor!" The emperor granted him a seat and spoke kindly to him, saying, "I've heard of your martial prowess, General. You truly are a man of valor. I've assigned you to a crucial post. Don't disappoint me. The official documents will be sent soon." The deputy general left the palace, deeply honored. Shortly afterward, the man in the fur cloak came to his house, collecting the agreed-upon amount of silver as per the written agreement. Now certain that his promotion was secured, the deputy general relaxed and began boasting to his friends and family about his impending rise to power. But a few days later, the deputy general received word that someone else had been appointed to the general's position. Shocked and enraged, he rushed to the Ministry of War and demanded an explanation. "The emperor himself appointed me to this position. How could you assign someone else?" The Minister of War was confused. Upon hearing the deputy general's account of his audience with the emperor, it seemed more like a dream than reality. The minister became furious and ordered the deputy general arrested, throwing him into prison. Only then did the deputy general reveal the name of the man who had introduced him to the emperor. However, no such person existed in the court records. After spending another 10,000 taels of silver, the deputy general was finally released from prison. He was dismissed from his position, his career ruined. It was a strange and mysterious tale. The deputy general, although naive, could hardly believe that the entire imperial court had been a deception. The manipulation he fell victim to seemed to have involved some sort of illusionary trick. The true criminals, as it turned out, were those who used such deceitful methods without resorting to weapons. In Jiaxiang County, there lived a scholar named Gifted Player of the Qin, a traditional Chinese stringed instrument. One day, while on a trip to the eastern outskirts of the county, he happened upon 2 men who were digging in the soil and uncovered an ancient qin. Li bought the instrument for a small sum and took it home. After cleaning it, the qin emitted a strange, glowing radiance. When he tuned the strings and played it, the sound was strikingly clear and pure. Li was overjoyed, as if he had discovered a precious gem. He stored it in a brocade bag and hid it in a secret room, never allowing even his closest family or friends to see it. A newly appointed county magistrate, named Cheng, came to visit Li, bearing a formal visiting card. Li, being a solitary man who rarely socialized, was obliged to return the visit. A few days later, Cheng invited Li for a drink, and though Li was hesitant, he couldn't refuse. Cheng, charming and elegant, entertained him with witty conversation and refined manners. Li was drawn to his company and admired his grace. After a few days, Li invited Cheng to his home in return, and the two spent an evening talking and drinking together. Their friendship grew stronger, and soon they became close companions, sharing many joyful moments beneath the flowers and moonlight. More than a year passed, and one day, Li visited Cheng's house. He noticed a qin wrapped in a brocade bag on the table. Intrigued, he took it out and played a few notes. Cheng asked, "You also know how to play the qin?" Li replied, "It's my greatest passion." Cheng, surprised, said, "We've known each other for so long, and I never knew you had such a skill." He then lit some incense and asked Li to play. Li played a piece, and Cheng, impressed, said, "You truly are a master. Let me show you a small piece I know. Please don't laugh." He then played a song called The Wind's Journey, which sounded light and ethereal, as if it transported the listener to another realm. Li was deeply impressed and expressed a desire to become Cheng's student. From that point on, they became Qin playing companions, and their friendship deepened. Over the next year, Cheng taught Li everything he knew about the instrument. Yet, each time Cheng visited Li's home, Li continued to play only an ordinary Qin, never revealing the treasured ancient instrument he had kept hidden. One evening, after both men had indulged in a bit of wine, the county magistrate said, "I've just composed a new piece. Would you like to hear it?" He then played a hauntingly beautiful melody called Shangfei, a song filled with sorrow and longing. The notes sounded as though they were weeping, and Li couldn't stop praising the performance. The county magistrate sighed and said, "It's a shame I don't have a fine Qin. If I had one, the music would be even more captivating." Li's eyes lit up. "I have an ancient Qin, a rare treasure. Now that I've found a true connoisseur, how could I possibly keep it hidden?" With that, he went to his secret room, unlocked the cabinet, and brought out the ancient Qin. The county magistrate dusted it off with his sleeve, placed it on the table, and began to play. The sound was indeed remarkable, clear, nuanced, and elegant. The music flowed like a river of emotions, and Li, captivated by the melody, couldn't help but clap along in rhythm. The county magistrate chuckled and said, "My humble skills hardly do justice to such a fine instrument. If my wife were to play it, perhaps there would be a few more pleasant notes." Li, intrigued, asked, "Your wife is also skilled at playing the Qin?" The county magistrate nodded and replied, "The piece I just played, I learned it from her." Li expressed regret, saying, "Unfortunately, I've never had the honor of hearing her play." The county magistrate smiled. "We have been close friends for some time, and there's no need to worry about formalities. Tomorrow, bring your Qin to my home, and I will ask her to play for you behind the curtain." Li, excited, agreed to the plan. The next day, Li brought his Qin to the county magistrate's house. The magistrate had prepared food and wine, and the two sat down to drink together. After a while, the magistrate took the Qin inside and then returned to join Li at the table. As they sat, a faint fragrance wafted through the air, and through the parted curtain, Li glimpsed the figure of a beautiful woman. Moments later, the sound of Qin music floated out from behind the curtain. The melody was mesmerizing, and though Li couldn't tell what piece it was, he felt his mind begin to wander, his senses overwhelmed by the music. When the song ended, a servant lifted the corner of the curtain, and Li caught a glimpse of the woman playing the Qin. To his astonishment, she was an exquisite beauty, no older than 20, and her presence made his heart race. The county magistrate raised a large cup of wine and urged Li to drink. As they continued, the music resumed, this time a piece titled "The Elegance of Leisure." Li, enchanted and overwhelmed by the beauty of the moment, drank glass after glass, feeling more and more dizzy. By the time the evening came to a close, he was intoxicated and left, demanding the return of his ancient Qin. The county magistrate, with a sly smile, said, "You've drunk too much. I'm afraid you'll stumble and break the Qin on your way home. Come back tomorrow, and I'll have my wife perform another piece for you." The next day, Li returned to the magistrate's house, only to find it eerily quiet. An old servant opened the door and told him, "The magistrate and his family left before dawn. I don't know where they went, but they said they would return in 3 days." 3 days later, Li went back to the house. He waited until nightfall, but the magistrate had not returned. The local officials and guards grew suspicious, and a report was made to the county governor. When they opened the door to the magistrate's residence, they found it empty. Only a table, chairs, and an unmade bed remained. The matter was reported to the provincial authorities, but no one could make sense of what had happened. Li, heartbroken over the loss of his beloved Qin, couldn't eat or sleep. Desperate, he traveled far to the magistrate's hometown in Hunan to search for him. 3 years earlier, the magistrate had used money to buy an official position in Jiaxiang. Li inquired at his hometown, but there was no record of such a man. Some people mentioned a Taoist priest named Cheng, who was known for playing the qin and reputed to have some magical abilities. 3 years ago, he had mysteriously disappeared and never returned. Li became suspicious that this Taoist was the same person he had befriended. After further investigation, he confirmed that the appearance and age matched perfectly. It dawned on him that the magistrate had used money to purchase his post purely as a ruse to steal the ancient qin. Over the course of their year-long friendship, the magistrate had never once discussed music openly with Li. Gradually, he introduced the qin to their conversations, showing off his own modest skills. Then he used a beautiful woman to seduce and confuse Li, eventually using her to steal the qin. It was a slow and deliberate con that had taken 3 years to execute. Li's beloved qin was now gone, and the magistrate, now revealed as the crafty Taoist priest Cheng, had an even greater obsession with the instrument than Li himself. He had used his charm and deceit to steal a treasure, making him one of the most elegant and subtle swindlers in the world. Cao Cao's tomb. Outside the city of Xuchang, there was a river with turbulent, rapid waters. The waves surged violently, and the river grew dark as it neared a cliffside. One summer, a man decided to jump into the river to bathe, but something strange happened. Suddenly, as if struck by an axe, his body was severed in two, floating to the surface. Not long after, another person met the same mysterious fate. The townspeople were stunned, puzzled by the strange occurrences. When the county magistrate heard about this, he ordered a team to divert the river upstream and drain the water. As they did so, they discovered a deep cave at the base of the cliff. Inside the cave was a rotating wheel with sharp blades mounted on it. The wheel was dismantled, and further investigation led them to uncover a small stone tablet inscribed with ancient Chinese characters. These characters were written in Han seal script, and upon closer inspection, they revealed that this was the tomb of Cao Cao, the famous warlord of the late Eastern Han Dynasty. The tomb was then broken open, and the coffin inside was disturbed. The decomposed bones of Cao Cao were removed, and the treasures, gold, silver, and other valuable artifacts that had been buried with him, were also extracted. In the words of the historian, a poet of future generations once wrote, "Digging through 72 suspicious tombs, one must surely find a tomb where a ruler's body lies." But little did they know that Cao Cao's body was buried in a tomb outside these 72. Cao Cao was indeed a cunning hero, but in the end, after 1,000 years, his bones were uncovered and discarded. What good was his cunning after all? Alas, Cao Cao's brilliance was also his greatest folly. This story vividly captures the irony of Cao Cao's life. Despite his intellect and strategic genius, he ultimately could not escape the inevitable decay of time. His ambitious and ruthless nature led him to build a great legacy, but in the end his body was nothing more than a forgotten relic, exhumed and thrown aside, a symbol of the fleeting nature of power and cunning. Thank you so much for your companionship as we read through the 63rd volume of Liaozhai Qiantu. The stories have been incredibly rich and engaging. Additionally, Little Fish, while translating this volume, consulted a vast amount of resources. She shared with us that besides Liaozhai Qiantu, there's also a set called Liaozhai Tushuo, created in the late Qing Dynasty. This set is based on the stories from Liaozhai Ji by the famous Qing Dynasty writer Pu Songling. The illustrations were commissioned by Shu Run, a prominent merchant of the time, who gathered some of the best artists to create the illustrations for the imperial court as a tribute for Empress Dowager Ci's 60th birthday. It is believed that around the 26th year of the Guangxu reign, 1900, during the Boxer Rebellion, the Liaozhai Tushuo was looted by the Russian Imperial Army. It wasn't until April 19, 1958, that the USSR's Foreign Cultural Liaison Committee returned the artwork to China, where it is now housed in the National Museum of China. Because the museum's collection has not been made publicly available, Little Fish hasn't had the chance to access the full resources. But regardless, we want to express our gratitude to all of you for watching Eastern Brush, Western Soul, a channel that celebrates both Eastern ancient texts and painting. Thank you once again.